The Blackpool Branches route, as developed by Just Trains, has to be hands down one of the best routes for train sim world, on par with the Niedertalbahn, London Commuter, although it is much better if you have the Class 700 mod by trainsim.cz, but that's by the by, and Nahverkehr Dresden. In stark contrast to routes such as the Arosa-Linie and NEC New York to Trenton. Well, I don't have either of them, but the latter of which I've heard was such a disaster, and it still isn't in a playable condition, so I'm not getting that. Shame really, because that had such potential. But what we're here to discuss today are the church models on the Blackpool Branches route. On the vast majority of TSW routes, religious buildings like churches are often represented by the same generic models, with a few exceptions. For example, Cologne Cathedral on the Schnellfahrtstrecke Köln to Aachen, Rochester Cathedral on the southeastern high speed, the Meißner Dom on Nahverkehr Dresden, Truro Cathedral on the West Cornwall local, the Stiftskirche St. Goar on the Linker Rheinstrecke route, although that hasn't been modelled very accurately, just to name a few. But I thought it would be interesting to discuss the churches that had been actually modelled on the Blackpool Branches route. First off, and the most prominent one, which is what you see as you leave Preston, is the Roman Catholic St. Walburge's Church. It is notable for its tall spire, rising to 94 metres or 309 feet, being the third tallest spire in the United Kingdom after Norwich Cathedral and Salisbury Cathedral, and also the tallest spire on a parish church in the UK. And also, it was the tallest building in the north of England before the 20th century. It is a Grade 1 listed building and a prominent landmark in Preston. I visited this church in February 2020, not long before everything went to shit. Well, you know what happened. The modelling on St. Walburge's Church is actually quite good. I was impressed to see how detailed it was, although, of course, it's not quite like what the real thing is, but it's not that far off actually. It also should be noted that Preston has the highest amount of Catholics in any UK city. The Reformation really didn't reach the remote parts of Lancashire, and many remained faithful to the Catholic Church, which is why you see many grand Catholic churches, including St. Walburge's Church, in Lancashire. The next church to be modelled is no longer a church today, but the Blackpool Branches was set in 1986, so I can only assume that it was still a church back then. This is the former St. Mark's Church, not far from St. Walburge's Church, and the second church that you see as you're leaving Preston towards Blackpool. The modelling is still pretty accurate. I compared it with the real thing and what I saw over the Ribble today whilst coming in from Penworth, and after having done a bit of research, the church is nowadays flats, which is a common trend among churches that are no longer used for worship if they have not been vested or preserved, like the Church's Conservation Trust. This is also true with many nonconformist churches such as former Methodist chapels. The next church, which has been modelled, is St. Michael's Church in Kirkham. This church is on medieval foundations and was one of many medieval churches in this part of Lancashire, but the current building dates from 1822, designed by Robert Roper, an architect from Preston. The tower and spire were added at a later date. Speaking of, back when the Blackpool Branches was set, the church had a ring of 8 bells. but they were replaced by a much better ring of 10 around the time that the line between Blackpool and Preston was electrified. These pictures were taken by me on a visit in October 2023, and among things inside is the chandelier. It's quite common for churches in Lancashire to have brass chandeliers, and there's also a 3-manual Harrison & Harrison pipe organ. Strangely enough, the model of St Michael's Kirkham was also used to represent Preston Minster or the Church of St John the Evangelist, which, well, they both have spires, so, but I find that a bit odd, but there we go. Also in Kirkham is St John the Evangelist Roman Catholic Church, or St John in the Willows, as it is more commonly known by locals. It's another Roman Catholic church. In 1809, the first Roman Catholic chapel was built in Kirkham, and it was known as the Willows because it was in an area surrounded by willow trees. The current church was built in 1845 by Augustus Pugin, the architect behind the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben. I also visited this church in October 2023, and here are a few pictures. There are also a ring of bells in this church, which full circle change ringing is not common in Catholic churches, but there are plenty of those in Lancashire's Catholic churches. But this church has 6 bells. The next church is at Poulton, and it is a non-conformist church, as you can see. Well, non-conformist churches don't tend to have towers, with a few exceptions. The building you can see is the former Poulton Congregational Church, which no longer houses a congregation. The congregation now is Poulton United Reformed Church, which have moved into a building next door to the church. As far as I can judge, according to Google Street Maps, it is now used as flats. I might be wrong, but that's what I think it is. On a side note about Bournemouth, the medieval St Chad's Church, which was rebuilt in the 18th century, in-game is represented by the model of St John the Evangelist Church in Blackpool. Of course, this is inaccurate, as Just Trainz didn't model the church itself, so here's a picture of what the actual St Chad's at Poulton looks like, taken on the same day that I visited the churches at Kirkham. It was also an opportunity to have one last ride out of Class 319 before they were withdrawn from Northern, but that I'm going off topic. The last church that was modelled is, of course, St John the Evangelist Church in Blackpool, which I mentioned for standing in for St Chad's at Poulton. The church originally was built in 1821, but the current church you see today was built in 1877 to 1878. Nowadays, it serves more like an evangelical megachurch than an actual traditional parish church. Although when the Blackpool Branches route was set, it may have still been ordinary traditional worship, but I do not know for certain. But one thing I do know is that the church was rebuilt around 2003 to accommodate it more for the evangelical style of worship, and the Willows organ was removed at that time and now resides in the rebuilt organ of Lancaster Priory. There is also a ring of 8 bells in this church, although the treble and the second bells are not hung, and the bells as a result are not ringable. I don't know how long they've not been rung for, but that's what Dove's Guide says. Not related to Dovetail Games, this is for bell ringing. So, as far as I know, these are all the churches that have been modelled on the Blackpool Branches route, and as such, the models of churches substitute for other churches on the route. For example, St Mark's at Preston substituting for Emmanuel Methodist Church in Ormskirk, as you see right next to the station. This makes a welcome change and just shows how much dedication that Just Trainz have put into the Blackpool Branches route, making it one of the best routes in train sim world. as opposed to some other routes which are really bad. I recommend you buy it, especially if you like the pacer, but that's by the by.